Warning, the following conversation features fierce women, once high school acquaintances, now friends, who talk about real topics that most people either try to avoid or pretend don't exist. In here, it can get messy, but it's always the truth. Welcome to the Messy Truth.
Okay, hey everybody, I'm Becky. We are back with the Messy Truth. It's been a while. We're so sorry we've been gone for a while, but you know what? Life happens, so deal with it. With me, below me is Maureen, and then Jen is right here. And so we're going to get right into things because we have a special guest joining us in a little bit, and we want to be able to hit certain topics before they come on. But what we thought would be cool is to talk about some of the awareness things that happened in September. And then now that we're in October, and October is coming to an end by the time this comes out. So we wanted to hit on some of those things, and we're going to settle into one and have a follow-up in a couple of days on that other topic, which you'll find out soon enough. If you haven't seen our Disney episode, we flaked on that and we didn't put out Facebook announcements about it, but we will be bothering you with that shortly. So if you haven't seen our Disney episode and you are a Disney lover, you've got to watch it, because it's really different than all of our other video podcasts, because there's a lot of pictures in there about when we're talking about certain things of Disney, a lot of images for you to see what we're talking about. And if you're not a Disney lover, hopefully you will be one when you're finished watching that. Right? Because we're all Disney. Right. So Awareness Month, September, we're gonna, even though we're out of September, what we think this is really an important topic to talk about. September was Suicide Prevention Awareness Month. And so I don't know if any of you have seen the movie Dear Evan Hansen yet, but if you haven't seen the Broadway musical, I mean, see the Broadway musical first, but if you can't see the musical, then go see the movie. It talks about suicide. It talks about anxiety and depression, especially in teenagers. The music is amazing. The story is beautiful. I bawled my eyes out at 2 parts in the movie. And it's just really good. So if you are one of those people who just kind of don't think much about what's happening with teenagers these days and their issues of anxiety and depression, I really encourage you to watch that. It just has a great message. And I'm going to stop and shut my mouth and let Jen or Maureen jump in here for a few about suicide prevention.
Go ahead, Jen.
I was, sorry, it's rotten cough. Looking at, what month has this and that. And it turns out October is also, even though I'm like, this is going to be relatable to September and Suicide Awareness Prevention Month, but Suicide Prevention Awareness. The reason I'm bringing this up is because October also happens to be ADHD and ADD Awareness Month. And it turns out, you would think logically, well, if someone is struggling with or suffering from ADD or ADHD, it can cause in some people anxiety. And then when anxiety goes left untreated for a long period of time, it can spiral into depression. And it turns out there is actually a link where there's a statistic that says that adults and teenagers are more likely to be at risk for suicide as a result of struggling with ADHD, which makes a tremendous amount of sense, because when you have ADD or ADHD, you just have these overwhelming feelings that everybody else has it together. Everyone else, can get their grades right, or everyone else can, show up to work on time, or they're organized and all of their executive function skills are what they should be. And they have everything, neatly lined up. And people who struggle with ADD and ADHD, some of those skills are lacking, and they have to learn the skills over time. And oftentimes, people are taking medication to help them with it as well, because there's so much going on in the prefrontal cortex of the brain where it's not focused. And then sometimes they'll start something and become hyper focused and can't get off of that task. So there's like a real struggle in there day in and day out. And when you perceive everyone else around you or the world around you as being perfect, or they don't struggle with these things because maybe people don't talk about it as much, that really, it can damage your self-worth, what you think you are, what you think you should be, insecurity and all that. And it's heartbreaking, and it's rough, and it's difficult, and it's so hard. And it can really spiral into, anxiety and depression and suicide. So I just wanted to bring that up because ADHD, I don't know if there's just more of it and it's just exploded, or we're now more aware of it, just like with other things, health issues that people struggle with, because at the end of the day, it's a health issue. It's just a function of the brain not firing properly, like with anxiety or depression. And like someone has an issue with eyes, so they need glasses. If you struggle with ADHD or any of these other, some of the other mental things going on in your brain, it's the neuro pathways, the neuro wiring. You need glasses for whatever is going on up here in order to function a little bit better and more efficiently. So I just wanted to bring that up because I thought it's kind of a big thing.
It is a big thing. And something you said kind of was hitting me a little bit, which is the idea of being stressed out because you think everybody else has it together. And one of the things that, and not to go back to that movie, but there's a song in the Dear Evan Hansen movie that's called The Anonymous Ones. And that song really, the words in that song really hit me because it talks about the people who are really struggling with these thoughts of putting themselves out of their misery and just not wanting to hurt anymore. Suicide, from my understanding, my own feelings, is not about like wanting to kill yourself, hurt yourself. It's just about wanting to not be in pain anymore. And the words in that song really touch on the fact that so many people who seem like they have it together, they go through the motions. They're the people who are moving fast all the time. They're the people who are smiling all the time. Those very well could be the people who are struggling with these things. And I'll be completely candid and say that there have been 2 times in my life, one many years ago, and then another just within the past 6 months, where I really seriously struggled with those thoughts and actually got to the point where I was like, this is scary. I think I should drive myself to the emergency room because I don't trust myself. And it wasn't that I wanted to do, I didn't want to not live. I just didn't want to be in pain anymore. And so I think that's important. And so if you're one of those people, just know that you're not alone. Reach out to somebody that you trust. If you're in that moment, and sometimes it's just that you can get caught up in the moment. And that's really, like, if you do any research on suicide, you'll see that a lot of people will act on it because they're caught up in a moment. If they can have somebody help them snap them out of that moment, if you know that you can have somebody help you snap them out, then reach out to that person that you think could maybe snap you out. And if not, drive yourself to the hospital, call 911. There's also the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which you can find online, but the number is 1-800-273-8255, and it's below us here. So you can see that and keep that handy, but you're not alone. People are struggling with this more than they say. And I don't know, I want to leave a chance for Maureen, if you have anything about that you wanted to say.
I don't have a lot, but I had a friend have, let me say have, because even though they're not on this earth anymore, they're around us. A really good friend of mine, when I was in my mid 30s, committed suicide, and he had gotten caught up in drugs, and he committed suicide. I feel, because like you had mentioned, Becky, you don't want to be in that pain anymore. And I think he felt like he had disappointed his family so much also. So the disappointment that you feel in yourself, like Jen, you mentioned, when you feel like everybody around you has it together. And and then you're low self-esteem. And so I think it was like a mix of that for him. He was just in deep emotional pain, and he had just repeatedly disappointed his family, he felt. And so he took his life. And I know we're doing a video on this. I'm just so not prepared to like even dive deep into it, and we don't have the time for that at the moment. But I just like Becky said, when you're feeling in that regard, it's that split moment, if somebody could just, be there or take you out of it before you make that decision that lasts forever, just make that phone call, reach out to somebody.
Yeah. Just to be able to say yourself, you're not alone. There's other people who are struggling, and there's somebody out there who would be honored to be able to help you through that moment, to get you through that moment, because your life is worth living and the pain is not forever. I think that's really important for people to know.
Yeah.
And I think probably this topic definitely deserves its own session, because it's so heavy, and we're really touching lightly on it because we're moving through a couple of awarenesses of October. And so the next awareness that we want to just touch on before we get to the one we're going to settle on for this episode is October. Obviously, I think most people know that October is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. So ladies, check your boobs, feel them all the time. There's nothing wrong with that. And know what you're looking for. I think so many people are massaging deeply when you're doing a breast exam on yourself, but really, like, I don't know about you, but when I go to my doctor, I mean, and I'll get into this in a little bit, but I have to be checked every 6 months. And I'm about to be checked again, more so than normal next week. And it really freaking stresses me out like you wouldn't believe, because every time there's always something that they see, and I see it on the screen, and it stresses me out. And then I always have to do a follow-up. So for me, I'll be doing an ultrasound and an MRI on Tuesday. And I'm like one of those people that I'm already planning. I'm already planning my, I've already planned my memorial service. I go,
oh my gosh,
I planned my memorial services years ago, but knowing that this is coming up, I did text a couple of my family members yesterday and told them, on Thursday actually, and told them, I'm like, hey, just a reminder, this person is running my memorial. I want it here, and this person's going to do my eulogy, and I want this person to do this and this song to be sung.
no.
Calls me and she's like, what's going on? I'm like, nothing, I'm just updating.
No, I don't even like that. Even if something was to happen, you can't have that mindset.
It makes me feel good to plan it. I don't know why. It's not morbid for me. It actually brings me joy to be able to have final words that I know are from me to the people that I love. That
the ultimate party planner.
Yeah. It's crazy. But anyway, check your boobs. Check them all the time in the shower, because you just never know. Early detection is the biggest prevention from like really progressing. And Jen, I saw you go, and I want you to say what you were going to say.
It's so interesting you said that, because last fall, back it up just a little bit. I think I went in for like my annual, overall checkup with my, GYN. I believe it was September, like August or September. And she checked, everything was fine. A month later, so this was, fall of 2020, literally 1 month later, I felt a lump. And I'm like, what? Like, how did she not pick up on this? Like, what the heck? And I had to go, I went and got the mammogram, and I had already scheduled a mammogram anyway. So, I mean, the good thing was I only had to wait 2 weeks maybe, because that was already scheduled. But of course, in the 2 weeks, I'm like, what the heck? Like, it popped up so fast. Like, I don't understand what's going on. What could it be? And of course, sometimes you can't help. I can't help anyway. The worst case, I'm like, what if it is breast cancer? Yada, yada. So that really freaked me out, how fast a professional checked me. And then literally a month later, I'm kind of like, oh my gosh, what the heck is that?
Yeah.
It completely freaked me out. And obviously, thank God, it was benign. Like, it was just a cyst, which is, ridiculously common. But when you don't have experience with this personally, it'll freak you out.
Oh yeah, for sure. You know, like I watched my mom go through breast cancer. She got it later in life. I want to say she was maybe early 70s when she got it, and she went through treatment for about 2 years, and then has been clear ever since. But it's horrible to watch somebody go through that, and it's ladies, it's completely normal for us to jump to conclusions when you have an abnormal mammogram and they want to do a follow-up, and it's that waiting for the follow-up that you can't get that ultrasound a week later. And that, I don't know if you're anything like me, I leave the hospital and I'm already like calling my kids like, I love you, I love you, right? And because I just think like, what is this going to look like if I have this? And I'm positive there'll probably be a day that it happens to me, but at least I get checked every 6 months with MRIs and mammograms and ultrasounds. And ladies, also, don't be afraid of the mammogram. It is very uncomfortable. And I had years ago, before I had my first mammogram, I had my aunt pull me aside. She's like, look, if you want to know what a mammogram feels like, in January, go out to your garage when it's a really, really cold night, take off your shirt, lay down, put your boobs down on the freaking cold cement of your garage floor, and then bring your garage door down.
Oh,
Right.
and she's pretty right, except maybe
Right. Or put your boob in like the open up the freezer door.
Yeah,
and slam it shut on it.
But it's really not that bad. It's really not as bad as that. But don't be afraid. Don't let your fear of a mammogram keep you from going and getting tested, because you would rather deal with the discomfort of a mammogram than finding out that you could have prevented breast cancer in the stages of development.
Yeah, even if you have no boobs, I have pretty much nothing but a nipple, and they still find a way to get you in there.
Yeah,
so you still need to go.
Yeah. So, the facts of breast cancer are that there's 255,000 women every year who get breast cancer, and 42,000 of those women die each year from breast cancer. And the studies show that if they were the early detection, it keeps you alive. So please just get on it. Get on your boobs. If you don't want to check your boobs, have somebody else check your boobs. Mm-hmm. And, just make sure you're good there, So I don't know if you guys have any experience with people, who had breast cancer, but it's, the hair, it's not just, everybody knows your hair comes out because of the chemo, but did you know that your nails also will fall off?
No, I did not know that.
Painful. And my mom had it, and my mom's a strong horse, and she trudged through, but it weakened her, and she's struggles with neuropathy in her feet, that once you get neuropathy from the chemo, once you have it, it doesn't ever go away. Once it's there, there's no preventing it, it's just treating it. And so neuropathy is just a nerve pain that you have in your body, and she has it in her feet now because of the chemo. So, you really want to try to catch that stuff early if you can. Yeah.
Yeah.
And wear pink for the last couple of days in October, and, support those people. I'm sure you've probably done one of those runs, right, Maureen, for supporting breast cancer, or maybe not?
I don't think I have, not because I don't want to. I just, I haven't come across one at a time that I was running, for something, but I will. If somebody wants to run one with me, I'm up for it.
Yeah. And
I'm game.
Groups out there, stuff like that. And to be fair, breast cancer is not just limited to women. It happens to men. So about 1 out of every 100 breast cancers diagnosed in the United States is found in a man. So we're not leaving you guys out too. Check your chest and make sure that you don't have any lumps from time to time, and just be on that. So what else do we got?
Well, I think we're rolling into this whole, awareness months, because we are going to we'll eventually here in a couple of minutes do a cast on domestic violence awareness. And what's interesting is, just real quick before, we dive into all of that. So when we're talking about domestic violence, people are always thinking physical violence, and generally speaking, that's what it is. However, I think it's also important to realize too that there are people who are suffering at the hands of their spouses due to other types of abuse. So when you have physical abuse in a marriage, there is always the other components with it of verbal abuse and emotional abuse. Now, in cases where you have emotional or verbal abuse, you don't always have the physical abuse. However, where there's physical abuse, you always have the emotional and the verbal abuse. And I think that's important to note, because when we do start really getting into the whole domestic violence issue, women who are battered or their children who are battered, and sometimes it's just the spouse and it's not the children. There's always those elements of verbal abuse and emotional abuse. And with emotional abuse comes the whole, like the guilt tripping, the punishment, retaliation, gaslighting, all those other factors. So there's so much psychological damage that's also put on the victim. So it's not just physical. Mm-hmm. And there are many people who say oftentimes emotional abuse can last longer than just the bruises. And when people are walking away from a marriage where you have all that physical abuse, there's also the verbal and the emotional wrapped up into it, and the degrading, comments, or the, overly critical comments, things, that those patterns of behavior that go on for years and years and chip away at who you are and at your self-esteem. That is probably, it takes longer to get over than the scars and the bruises. And I'm not speaking from personal experience, so it's not like I'm some kind of expert on this or anything, just from what I've read. And if I'm speaking out of turn and there is someone who's listening or watching and they're like, she doesn't know what the heck she's talking about, that's entirely possible. So,
well, and to that effect, I think it's fair to say that none of us have endured any type of domestic violence that is physical abuse. But I do think it's important just to say what the okay, sorry. I guess I was thinking in our current situation.
Oh, not in our current situation.
Yeah,
no.
So I don't want to whatever the word is, dismiss
Mm-hmm.
that. But I think it's important to say that the definition of domestic abuse is a pattern of one person trying to control or dominate another person. And it's not just if it just happens one time, that's not domestic abuse. It's a repetitive pattern. It's a consistent thing that's happening over time. And it can there's 4 types of domestic abuse categories. So Jen kind of hit on some of them: physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, and economic abuse. And, you can do a search on these and see that, but physical abuse is pretty standard. Sexual abuse, we kind of understand what that is. And sexual abuse can also be a threat. And physical abuse can also just be a threat of physical harm. Emotional abuse is mostly threats, manipulations, lies, gaslighting, name calling, lots more stuff than that. And then economic abuse is denying that person access to bank accounts, denying them the opportunities to be able to work, so they can have control over them financially. But I'm curious what you were going to say about your experience. And I know we have a few minutes before we do have a guest joining us shortly. We're holding off on that. But Maureen, I just want to throw it over to you.
Yeah, it was many, many moons ago, and it was a relationship that I had that started out. You just never know that somebody is the way that they are when you first start a relationship out, right? Yeah. I think it was in my, early, not even 20 yet. So I'm in my late teens, high school, end of high school. And it just, slowly that person changes, so there was some physical, attributes, or not attributes. I'm trying to think of a nice way to say it. He hit me. He hit me. The first time he hit me was because I didn't want to have sex with him. And it just came out of nowhere. And then, it it did not become a pattern. So then if we're, and that was my, that was going to be one of my questions today about domestic violence. So this wasn't a pattern, but it happened again. It wasn't a one-time incident. So, so that, anyway, we don't have time to get into all that. So I did experience some physical abuse.
All right. And I also think we are going to have another video cast on this with a person who's going to share her experiences, and that's going to be coming up in the next few days. But I see that our guest has joined us, and so I'm going to bring him in and introduce him. And he's taking time out of his busy day just to join us. So I'm going to bring in the police chief of New Paltz, and his name is Rob Lucchesi. He's a dear friend of mine. So he's going to be joining us shortly. And there's his name. And I think he's taking time out of his daughter's swim meet today to talk to us about his experiences with domestic violence calls. There he is in his car. Hey, Rob.
Hey, Beck, how are you?
So everybody, this is Rob, Jen, and Maureen. This is Rob Lucchesi. He's the police chief of New Paltz. He's a dear friend of mine. We go way back. I was thinking last night, Rob, that one New Year's Eve at my house, and I was videoing, and you were yelling at me, and I don't even know why. And then
there were a couple of.
And then also the sleepover at Snows, and I have a memory of you being in like Christmas pajamas.
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably. Yes. Yes.
So
many good memories.
Yeah, they were all my memories are good memories of you. But Rob and I see each other because both of our kids go to New Paltz, so we see each other a lot, and he's just a great guy. But thank you on behalf of all of us for taking the time out. I literally texted Rob yesterday. I'm like, you want to come on and talk about domestic violence? And he said, sure. And so he's taken some time out from his girls' swim meet today, right, Rob?
Yeah, well, we're here in Washingtonville at the OCIAs, so It's been good.
Thank you for doing that. So I think we already kind of gave, before you came on, we kind of gave a definition of domestic abuse and the different types of domestic abuse there are. We didn't really hit on why, but you as having a career in law enforcement, we thought it would be interesting to hear from you, your experiences with domestic violence calls, like what you think the public should know about it. We do have some questions, but I think I would like, if you have things like right off the top of the head, you'd want to say about it, and then we can throw our questions at you.
Okay. All right. So I've been a police officer for 28 years. I was a patrol officer for about 9 or 10 years. And then I was a detective for 5 or 6. And then I moved into supervisory capacity. And definitely had experiences as both an investigator and a patrol officer in responding to domestic violence calls. Domestic violence, they say it's the hidden crime. It's the crime that occurs outside of the purview of many people, and it's vastly an underreported crime. There's a stigma that's attached to domestic violence that many people just don't understand. I mean, even for me, when you start this career, you're like, well, why wouldn't somebody say something if they're being abused? And then it takes time and experience to kind of understand. And I think those issues that make it a hidden crime were exacerbated during the pandemic. When you talk about domestic violence and somebody who is reliant upon an offender for their food, the food on their table, the clothes on their back, their children's back, and the roof over their head, it's an untenable position to be put in. I do think, as a whole, law enforcement has made strides in how we approach domestic violence calls. I can only speak to the perspective of my agency. Early on in the early to mid 90s, we instituted a policy of mandatory arrest in certain circumstances for domestic violence. And then that was prior to New York State doing that. And so
mandatory things, like what's an example of like what would get someone arrested?
Any misdemeanor, if there's a misdemeanor or a felony involved in the domestic incident, that would require the officers to make that would mandate an arrest and charge. So our agency has also now become in Ulster County. Back in 2017, they began through a grant from the National Network. They began an intimate partner violence intervention program here, and it was created similar to some gun initiatives that had been started elsewhere. And the idea was that we want to address the causes of domestic violence, and in order to stop the problem. Most of up until this point, everything was really victim centric. So in order to proceed with the case, you need the victim to do this or the victim to do that. And what I really like about the Intimate Partner Violence Intervention Program is that it's offender centric. So we make, as part of this program, we handle the domestic itself the same way we would any other, but we then provide them with a letter letting them know, hey, you're on our radar now. We handled this call. We are aware of you. And we also communicate that information to other police agencies within the county and the Ulster County District Attorney's Office. So now other agencies know, because there are no geographical boundaries to crime, and certainly not for domestic violence. And so this puts all of these resources on the same page, and then we can try and address that. And it's really a carrot and stick approach. So when you have an offender, it's intervention. What programs can we bring in that can help stop the behavior? And so we work with also Family of Woodstock, Ulster County Probation. We work with the District Attorney's Office, the County Attorney's Office. So all of these entities are involved, and with the focus of trying to stop the behavior of the offender. And that's what I think is really helpful with this particular initiative.
That's really interesting, because all of these years, whenever I think about like what the police can do to help with domestic violence, I'm always thinking they're helping the victim, they're getting the victim out, they're protecting the victim. But I think this is like a brilliant idea to address the perpetrator. And I never even gave that a thought, that how many people, when you send out those letters like, hey, you're on our radar, how many people respond and say, all right, I'll go to this program, or I'll take anger management, or go to AA, or whatever? What do you see as the results of those sorts of things?
So it's incremental. So depending upon the nature. So if we deal with the domestic situation, an intimate partner domestic situation, if let's say it's a verbal only, we're going to give them a letter, and it lets them know the resources that are available. It puts them on notice that we're dealing with this. But we also, part of the notification process is it's crime victims assistance, the crime victim assistance program in Ulster County. And so if there's an arrest involved, then the courts become aware of that. The prosecutors involved, the public defenders and or the defendant's attorneys. And so that's where that dialogue that you're asking about, Beck, number wise, I don't know. But I will say that it has, this program has reduced the recidivism rate in Ulster County. It started out as a pilot program in the city of Kingston. And the results were excellent. And because of that, they have begun to expand that out in Ulster County. Town of Saugerties Police Department and our police department are in on it. And now they just received a $500,000 grant from the Department of Justice, from the Office of Violence Against Women. And they're going to be to allow them to implement this program countywide over the next 4 to 5 years. I have found it helpful in our agency because when you serve those letters, it's done in person. We're not mailing it; like we're giving it to you at the time of that interaction. If there's an arrest made, you're getting it at arrest. If there's no arrest made, we're handing it to the parties and saying, hey, we're aware of this. So there's that face-to-face interaction, not just, hey, you're getting something in the mail. So I think that's impactful.
Okay. I want to shut up for a second to see if Jen and Maureen have any questions, because I can dominate sometimes.
Go ahead, Jen.
Oh, thanks. Is it, I mean, I'm assuming like the numbers are out there that it's mostly violence against women. To what degree do you handle cases where it's women abusing men?
Small. I mean, it's a small percentage. It's predominantly, men, and are the primary aggressor, are identified as the primary aggressor. But we also have instances where when you're in a same-sex marriage, where it's the primary aggressor is another man on a man, or another woman with a woman, and we have handled those. Overall, I think we started our program, the Intimate Partner Violence Program, in May 1st. I think we officially kicked off, and to date, we've handled, I think, 44, 45 what we would term as intimate partner domestics. So that doesn't count domestics where it may be a father and a son, or two siblings. These are, and it's a expanded definition of a partner. Somebody that you're intimate with or have been intimate with. So, it doesn't, or maybe they have a child in common. So ex-boyfriends, ex-girlfriends, ex-spouses, all of that plays into it.
That's a good point, because I think a lot of us I automatically think of domestic violence as partners. I don't really think of it much, although it is within the family and within sort of relationships. Go ahead, Jen.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. I just wanted to ask, so have there been times where you will go into a situation and the person who's being abused, and let's just, for this argument's sake, say it's the wife or the girlfriend, does she start to backpedal, or like try to start to make excuses, or is she almost all the time happy that the police are there and she's going to get rescued, if you will, or helped out? I'm just wondering to what degree some women might be like, oh, this is real, and now he's going to get in trouble, and maybe I should just shut up.
We definitely run into those types of cases. And so for the officers, the training for all of this is important. So what, not just what a victim or who we believe is the victim may say, but what are the signs that you see? So for example, if you're responding to a domestic incident, are there signs that there's been property damage inside? Do you see things thrown about the house, like door damaged, dishes broken? What is the physical appearance of the people that you're encountering? And using your hypothetical, if the primary aggressor is the husband, what are some signs that you may see on the female victim? Do you see red marks on their neck that would be indicative of choking or strangulation? Do you see, anything bruising, swelling, anything that may indicate that they were a violent struggle? Do you see wounds on the primary aggressor? Are there marks on their arms that would indicate that there was a struggle? So those are all the things you would be looking at. And then if there are, then you're going to be making that arrest, and regardless of what the victim in that particular case, regardless of what their mindset is or what they're asking you. But we also make it perfectly clear to the offender that this is us. This is us. And I know that doesn't necessarily assuage that offender. There's still going to, potential for retribution against the victim. But the hope is that by putting them on notice now and working with all of these partners in a collaborative way, they will be less likely to go after that victim as a result of that. And I know it's a long-winded way of kind of answering that question, but
So that brings a thought to my mind. You and I, Rob, had a conversation recently, without going into detail, but I would imagine that there's, when women find themselves in a situation where violence is being perpetrated. I just want to draw attention to Jen's daughter speaking. Hi, Jen's daughter. Where violence is being perpetrated against a woman and the police come out. I would imagine that a lot of women in those situations, what they're looking to do is de-escalate the situation for themselves, so they don't have future, retribution being paid back to them. So how do you guys deal with all right, if we arrest this guy, even though you know you have to arrest this guy, what that potentially could mean for the woman if she's still in the house and then that guy comes back later. And I'm only saying men and women because you said that's the majority, not to be, you know, any other way.
Well, that's, I think, one of the strong points about this particular program. In the past, there is no way of that. You know, we would come, you handle the call for service, you make the arrest, you refer them to the court. With the Intimate Partner Violence Intervention Program, there is a follow-up that wasn't in place before that. So Crime Victim Services is reaching out for that victim to say, hey, what can we do for you? What is it that you need right now in this moment? Simultaneously, that matter is being brought before the court. So law enforcement is working with the prosecutors to present that case and present them with all of that information so that they can then see how is the best way that we need to navigate this and what is the ideal outcome in all of that. And then in addition to that, it's the communication that takes place between all of us so that we know these are things that are going on. So if you do deal with that domestic situation that results in arrest, you know, that person is now on the radar, and maybe it doesn't have to be necessarily another domestic arrest, but let's say we're seeing a call for service related to substance abuse or, you know, mental health, then we can say, hey, these are some other interventions we need to be, you know, some other groups we need to be bringing into the fold to address the behavior so that it doesn't result in another violent incident. So I think that's a huge change from the way we handled something, you know, 4 or 5 years ago. And that's also part of what, as an agency, we're trying to do, is not just with domestics, but with anything related to substance abuse, mental health in this day and age, is do that follow-up. You know, we may get there, we may triage it in the moment, mediate, whatever's handling, but, you know, can we make referrals to others that are more adept at handling that situation?
Mm-hmm. You said earlier, and I'm sorry, girls, but I gotta fire a bunch of questions, but you said earlier something about the causes of domestic violence. Like, we had listed the causes. Actually, no, I don't even think we got around to listing the causes, but in my research, what I found was, like, alcohol is typically a cause, a sense of entitlement in a person, lack of empathy, gender discrimination. But what, from your experience, when you show up at a domestic violence call, what do you see as the root cause of the domestic violence in that situation?
You know, for us, for the law enforcement officer, it's really whatever it's the straw that broke the camel's back is the best way to put it. Like, because it's what got us to there in that moment. There are a myriad of reasons why, you know, what may lead up to that, you know, and you named just a few, you know, financial issues, children issues, you know, overall the impact of the pandemic has had on our mental health and our ability to, the stresses we're under. There's a myriad, and I keep going to the program because we get there and it may be, you know, he said this or she said that, or, you know, that then led to a violent situation taking place. But obviously that's like the tip of the iceberg. And so by now getting them enrolled in this program, we can try to get down to what is going on. You know, can we teach, you know, is it a lack of coping skills? You know, you have all these stresses. Are there ways that we can relieve those stressors or that we can teach you how to better cope with those stresses, so that it doesn't result in that? It's hard because, you know, when you're that initial responding officer, you're there just in the moment. Mm-hmm. You know, and it's, okay, what do I need to do here? What do I need to do to make sure everybody's safe? And then I have another call that may be coming in on my radio. So I need to be going to that. This allows for that follow-up that I think, you know, you're, with all the issues that you're drilling it down.
Yeah. Maureen, you've been quiet over there.
I had two thoughts that you kind of answered one of them. When you go to a call, and I've heard many instances where a woman will be the aggressor, but makes it, and she'll be the one that calls, and she makes it seem as if it was the man that it was the aggressor. But you had listed, you know, the specs that you have to determine such situations. So that was kind of answered. And then what do you think, what is another addition or program to what you currently have in place that you think would help what you currently have to be more successful? Is there something that you would like to see added to what you guys already have running to help these situations?
Yeah, I think not so much for the police department per se, but I don't think we have enough mental health resources for
That's
what
what I
we,
meant.
you know,
I'm
the
sorry.
wave. Yeah. I mean, for what we're dealing with, you know, Ulster County has what they call a mobile mental health unit, and they just got the funding and the approval. They're going to have a crisis stabilization unit. They're going to put into Ulster County. I don't think you can have enough of that. We had an incident. We had 2 incidents yesterday, you know, where we had to rely upon mobile mental health. And we really try to lean into that group. Obviously, with everything after, you know, following George Floyd's murder, you know, there's been a lot of introspection and questioning of how police respond to mental health substance abuse cases, and what the appropriate response should be, and who should that be, you know, comprise that response. So I would say, I certainly think having greater mental health resources, because that's where I do, that's the driving factor, you know, whether it be finance, drugs, alcohol, whatever it is, it's a mental health issue, you know, and that's what's causing the violent situation in the relationship.
Right, because like you mentioned, when you're called in, it's the straw that broke the camel's back. There's this long history, most likely, that's taken place before you get there, that just needs to be addressed. And
Yep.
One question, and this probably, it has really nothing to do with law enforcement, but taking yourself out of the position of a police officer, when you go to these calls, or when you have gone to these calls in the past, is there something like, is there a common thread throughout each of them that where you get this feeling of, this is really upsetting, this is like, what is the most upsetting to you, the most frustrating thing to you when you go to these calls? And the reason why I'm asking is to make it a little bit more real to the people who are listening, more human, as opposed to like we're talking about, you know, legalities and programs, and which I think are awesome. I'm so excited to hear that there's programs for the perpetrator, but like for you, like give us a feeling when you go to these calls that you get when you show up at the door, your police officers show up at the door.
And when you get beyond the whole safety issue, I think, and you're dealing with the moment and it's secure, I think it's just, I don't know, for me personally, just sadness, like, you know, that you're, you know, it's awkward. It's a very awkward feeling because you're there and you're involved in, you know, you're violating it's invasive in the sense, like, you're in someone's home now, and you're now privy to some intimate details about them, their relationship. And I think, you know, that's sometimes it's awkward. Like I've always, like, I didn't want to ever have somebody think I'm judging them, you know, like, because I'm there, and so it was an uncomfortable, it was awkward, it's kind of like depressing. But you also, on the flip side, you know, you want to try to help, you know. I think that you keep up hope that there's something maybe that can be done. But I would say really that awkwardness and that sense of, I think, sadness to some extent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, we have about 9 minutes left before we need to bring this to an end, but I'm just curious, like if you can just briefly touch on, for a person who finds themselves in this sort of situation that's looking for protection, what's can you go through, because you talked to me about these, can you go through the ways in which somebody can keep themselves safe if they're really feeling like maybe they're in harm's way?
I mean, I would certainly say you can call or should call, your local police agency. I mean, every county is different, and every or municipality is different. But there are, I mean, first of all, there are 1-800 numbers that you can avail yourself to. There are, if there's substance abuse, that's the underlying factor. You can make those calls. The people on the other end aren't there to judge you. They're really there to help you and to provide you with the necessary resources. I can certainly speak to, in Ulster County, there are a number of agencies that work together. As I said, there's mobile mental health, there's the Ulster Prevention Council, there's Ulster County Crime Victims Assistance that can point you into towards others. There is Family of Woodstock. There's the Evolve program up as part of that. So making those phone calls doesn't commit you to something. It doesn't commit you to a course of action. And I think that's really important to keep in mind. Hey, what are my resources? Or even if you use I have a friend, what can I do to help them? What are some resources locally that they can tap into? And just remember that it's not, first and foremost, you're not alone. I mean, we are all struggling. That's the thing. I mean, we are all struggling.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. And then, doesn't commit you. Making that phone call doesn't commit you to a course of action. It's just letting you know that you're aware.
At what point would you suggest somebody seek out a certain type of order of protection?
I think it depends on the nature of what's going on. So, for example, for an order of protection to be issued by a local criminal court, a charge has to be levied. So if we go back to those situations where we're responding, there are times we'll ask the court. The victim may not want it, but we're going to say to the court, we want an order of protection issued on their behalf. An arrest has been made and we want to do that. However, if the individual victim does not want, when we talked about the reason why it's a hidden crime and all the reasons why they may not want to come forward, they can certainly look to pursue an order of protection issued through county family court. And in there, it's providing an affidavit, swearing to the information that's in there. And then the county court will look at that and determine about what the appropriate type of order of protection that can be issued is. So there's full stay away orders, there's no harass orders, and it doesn't require an arrest, which is important. Mm-hmm. And then ultimately, when you are really afraid, and there are indications that this person is willing to commit a violent act, and especially if they have access to firearms, then I would certainly encourage you to go to the police, because New York State has what they call a red flag law. We call it an extreme risk protection order, and that is something we file through Superior Court in our county, Ulster County, and in every county, Superior Court warrant that allows us to remove any firearms from that home and prevent that individual from legally obtaining any other firearms. So I think, it's all situational. And most importantly, when we deal with domestic calls or inquiries, our job, from my position as the chief of police, I want us to be able to provide people with their options. There are certain circumstances there's no choice. We're going to make that arrest as we talked about. But when we're getting those phone calls, that outreach, provide them with all of that information. And then, if they're asking for it, help them guide them to the appropriate place so they can make the decision that they need.
Yeah. Any final questions from you girls?
I had one real quick. Oops. I'm curious as to if there is someone who sees a friend who might be in that situation, or the victim has disclosed privately because they're embarrassed, whatever, ashamed, I'm in this position, I need help, and family members or friends want to help. Do you ever see cases where a friend or family will help and then the perpetrator will actually, because I'm wondering if there's a fear of some people, like, well, if I help her, I don't want him coming to my house and hurting me and my kids because, we're sheltering this victim. Does that even happen?
It has, I mean, I've experienced that not too frequently, in my time, but it does happen. And it's valid, and so in those instances, it's really situational. What are the threats that this person presents, where, and you make those assessments, and then we would work with that individual to say, okay, well, do we need to file an order of protection for them? Do we need to go out and are we going to arrest them? Do we have enough? Like, maybe it's an intimidate, depending upon the nature, could that friend or that person that you're describing be deemed a witness? So is there an intimidation of a witness, that we can levy that charge? That's where, we would look at the situation and say, what do we have and how can we address it? But again, I go back to the intimate partner. You have a ton of resources that come to bear when we, at least now in Ulster County, with those agencies that are involved in that. It's not just Rob Lucchesi, maybe it's we arrest that individual. Now we're working with probation and they're on electronic monitoring because the offense is whatever it may be. So now they're under the supervision of probation during, pre-sentencing, and an electronic monitor is part of that. Those are all, that's the beauty of it. When you work in those collaborative approaches, our resources are small, we're constrained, but when you tap into all of these other people, then you can try to work on those.
Good.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Rob, don't go anywhere, but thanks so much for taking the time out to talk to us today and just talk to us about what's out there. I'm excited to hear about these programs that have started. I think they're brilliant. It's like a paradigm shift almost. And for just giving us good information on how to help people get through this. And when this ends, when this podcast ends, I'll have a screen up with certain numbers you can call if any of this pertains to you, and maybe links to, hopefully. But on behalf of Jen and Maureen and me at The Messy Truth, thanks for watching and listening. And thanks, Rob, for joining us. And we'll see you next time. Okay, so one last thing, we've decided to come back on here really quick because we had a really good follow-up conversation with the police chief, Rob Lucchesi. And he gave us information about a workshop that's coming up this Thursday, October 28th, and it is called The Hidden Truths. We're the Messy Truth, and this workshop is on the hidden truths, and it's going to focus on domestic violence, specifically in teens. So if you are a teen, or you know a teen, or you have a teen who is in a relationship with somebody, domestic violence is happening with them as well. And so this might be a great opportunity for them to learn more things, ways to protect themselves and help themselves if they are the perpetrator. So look for that link that's going to follow up here shortly. And thanks again for joining us at The Messy Truth, and we'll see you next time.